The story begins not with a grand event, but in the quiet, hidden spaces of a huge and beautiful house. This wasn't just any house. It was a mansion, the kind you see in movies. It belonged to a man who was very, very rich, a tycoon who owned buildings and companies. His name was Mr. Vance. The house had more rooms than anyone could count in a single breath, with shiny marble floors that felt cold underfoot and giant windows that let in the sun. But for every part of the house that was bright and open, there was another part that was quiet and hidden. This was where the people who worked for the Vance family lived and moved. Among them was a woman named Elena. She was a housemaid, a quiet woman with kind eyes and hands that were often tired from work. Her whole world was her son, a little boy named Leo. Leo was 8 years old. He had a curious mind and big watching eyes. His world was divided into two. One world was the small, simple room he shared with his mother at the back of the mansion. The other world was the rest of the grand house, a place he was only allowed to walk through quietly, making sure he never got in the way. His favorite place in that grand world was a room he was never supposed to enter, the music room. It wasn't a big room, but to Leo it felt like a magical cave, and in the center of it stood a giant, beautiful piano. It was made of a deep, dark, polished wood that shone like a still lake at night. Its legs were curved like something from a royal palace. And the keys. They were a perfect mix of ivory white and jet black, waiting for someone to bring them to life. Sometimes, when the house was very quiet, usually in the hour before Mr. Vance returned from his office, Leo would sneak to the doorway of the music room. He would stand there just looking at the piano. He imagined what it would be like to touch those keys, to press them down and hear the sounds they could make. He wondered if the notes would be soft like a whisper or loud like a thunderstorm. It was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. One particular afternoon, the silence in the mansion was deep and heavy. The sun was streaming through the large windows, making dust particles dance in the air like tiny fairies. Elena was polishing a silver vase in the main hallway, her movements slow and careful. Leo, having finished his small homework assignment, felt the pull of the music room. He tiptoed past his mother, who gave him a small, warning smile. She always worried he would disturb something. He slipped into the music room. Today he felt a little braver. He moved from the doorway and walked right up to the majestic instrument. He didn't touch it. He knew better than that. He just stood beside it, his small hand hovering over the glossy wood, close enough to feel the coolness coming from it. He was lost in a daydream, imagining a great musician sitting on the stool, filling the house with wonderful music. He did not hear the soft footsteps on the carpet behind him. "Just what do you think you are doing in here?" The voice was sharp and cold like ice. Leo spun around, his heart jumping into his throat. Standing in the doorway was Mrs. Vance. She was a tall, elegant woman, always dressed in expensive, silky clothes. Her face was beautiful, but often held a look that was somewhere between being bored and being displeased. Right now it was pure displeasure. Leo was frozen. He couldn't find any words to say. Elena heard the voice and rushed into the room, her face filled with immediate worry. "Madam, I am so sorry." "Leo, come away from there right now," she said, her voice tight with fear. Mrs. Vance did not look at Elena. Her eyes were fixed on Leo. A slow, unpleasant smile spread across her lips. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the kind of smile that makes you feel very, very small. "Admiring the piano, are we?" she said, her voice dripping with a false sweetness. "It's a Bosendorfer. It costs more than your mother will earn in 20 years. Your grubby little fingers would only stain it." Elena flinched as if she had been struck. She put a protective hand on Leo's shoulder, trying to pull him away. But Mrs. Vance wasn't finished. The scene had broken the boredom of her afternoon, and she decided to make a show of it. She walked closer, looking down at Leo and his mother. She addressed Elena, but her words were meant to cut the little boy. "You know, Elena," she began, her tone light and mocking, "I have a proposition for you and your ambitious son." She paused, letting the silence build. "This piano is for artists, for cultured people. It is not a toy for servants' children to gawk at." Then she delivered the line that would change everything. She looked directly at Leo, her eyes cold. "If you can play this piano," she said, emphasizing each word slowly, "I'll raise you. I will take you under my wing, give you an education, treat you as my own. Can you imagine that?" She let out a short, harsh laugh. It was a sound that held no joy. But we both know that's impossible, don't we? It's a nice little dream, but that's all it is. Now get out of my sight, both of you, and stay out of this room. The words hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. For Mrs. Vance, it was a moment of casual cruelty, a way to reinforce her power in their place. She turned and walked away, her perfume lingering behind her like a ghost. Elena, her face pale with a mix of shame and anger, quickly led a silent Leo out of the room and back to their small quarters. She knelt in front of him, her eyes filled with tears. "Listen to me, Leo," she said, her voice trembling. What she said? You must forget it. Those are ugly words from a person with an ugly heart. We know our place. We do our work. We be good people. That is what matters. Do not dream of things that will only bring you pain. Leo nodded, but he wasn't really listening. He wasn't hearing the mockery anymore. His young mind, in a way that only a child's can, had filtered out the poison and held on to the challenge. The impossible challenge. If you can play this piano, I'll raise you. The words echoed in his head. They weren't a source of shame for him. They were a key. They were permission to dream about the impossible. He didn't want Mrs. Vance to be his mother. The idea was horrible. He loved his own mother more than anything. But the piano was something else. It was a beautiful, silent giant that he was now connected to by this strange and cruel promise. That night, as he lay in his small bed, he didn't think about Mrs. Vance's cold eyes or her mean laugh. He thought about the smooth white keys. He thought about the deep black keys. He wondered what sound they would make if he could just press one. He didn't know what raising someone meant, not really, but he understood what play this piano meant. And in the darkness, a secret, stubborn seed was planted in his heart. A seed of a dream that no one, not even his loving mother, knew was growing. He would learn. He didn't know how, but he would. He would learn to make that beautiful, silent giant sing. The days after the incident in the music room felt different for Leo. The world hadn't changed, but the way he saw it had. The mansion was no longer just a place of work and quiet rules. It was now a place that held a secret challenge. Mrs. Vance's words, which had been meant to crush his spirit, had instead given him a strange, silent purpose. He didn't want her to raise him. The very thought made him feel cold. He wanted something much simpler and yet much more difficult. He wanted to conquer the piano. The problem was, he had no idea how to even start. The grand piano in the music room was a forbidden kingdom, guarded by the memory of Mrs. Vance's cold stare. He couldn't go near it. He needed another way, a secret path. His opportunity came from a place he never expected. On the far edge of the Vance property, tucked away behind a cluster of old oak trees, was a small, slightly crumbling cottage where the old groundskeeper lived. His name was Mr. Abernathy. He was a man of few words, with a face weathered by years spent in the sun and wind, and hands that were rough and strong from tending to the soil and the plants. Leo sometimes helped his mother carry a tray of tea and food to Mr. Abernathy, as the old man's knees weren't what they used to be. One afternoon, while dropping off the tray, Leo heard a sound. It was a strange, jangly, out-of-tune sound. It was music, but not like any he had imagined coming from the grand piano. This was sad, old, and broken. Curious, he peeked through the slightly open door of the cottage. And there, in a corner of the cluttered but cozy living room, was a piano. It was the complete opposite of the Vance's beautiful instrument. It was small, with a wooden surface that was scratched and dull. One of its legs was slightly shorter, making it tilt to one side. The keys were not a bright white, but a yellowish ivory color, and some of them were chipped. Mr. Abernathy noticed the boy staring. "See something interesting, lad?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. "Is that a piano?" Leo asked, his eyes wide. "Aye, that's what it once was," the old man said with a soft chuckle. "Now it's more of a large, noisy piece of furniture. My wife, she used to play it. Been sitting there gathering dust since she passed on." He saw the longing in Leo's eyes, a look he remembered from his own youth. "You interested in such things?" Leo, usually a quiet boy, felt the words tumble out. He told Mr. Abernathy about the grand piano in the music room, about how he just wanted to know what it felt like to press a key and make a sound. He was careful not to mention Mrs. Vance's challenge. That was his secret, but his desire was plain to see. Mr. Abernathy was a quiet man, but he was a kind one. He understood what it was like to want something that seemed out of reach. He nodded slowly. "Well," he said, "it's not much to look at and it sounds even worse. But if you promise to be careful with it, you can come and visit it. Sometimes, when your mother doesn't need you." A feeling of incredible excitement bubbled up inside Leo. It was like someone had given him a key to a secret world. He thanked Mr. Abernathy over and over again, his voice barely a whisper. And so, Leo's second life began. After he finished his schoolwork and his small chores for his mother, he would tell her he was going for a walk. She, thinking he was just playing outside, would nod and smile, glad he was enjoying the fresh air. But Leo would run, his heart pounding, not to the gardens to play, but to the old groundskeeper's cottage. Mr. Abernathy would usually be outside, pottering around in his shed or tending to his vegetable patch, leaving Leo alone in the cottage with the old piano. The first time Leo sat on the wobbly stool and pressed a key, the sound that came out was a flat, dull thunk. It wasn't the beautiful ringing tone he had dreamed of, but it was a sound he had made. He pressed another and another. He discovered that the black keys made different sounds than the white ones. He realized that pressing a key hard made a louder sound and pressing it softly made a quieter one. This was his start, but he wanted to make real music, not just noise. How did people know which keys to press to make a song? His next discovery was the public library in the town. On Saturdays, when his mother had her half-day off, they would sometimes go into town to buy groceries. Leo asked if he could wait for her in the library while she shopped. The library was a new kind of magical place for him. It was quiet and it was free. He found the music section. There were books with big, complicated pictures of hands on keyboards. There were books for beginners. He found a simple book with children's songs in it, songs like Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. The book had pictures of the piano keys with letters written on them. C, D, E, F, G. He began to spend his Saturdays not reading storybooks but studying these music books. He couldn't take them home, as he had no library card and was afraid to ask his mother, who might wonder why he suddenly needed music books. So he had to memorize them. He would stare at a simple song, memorizing the sequence of letters, and then he would rush back to Mr. Abernathy's cottage during the week to try it out on the old, out-of-tune piano. His fingers at first were clumsy. They wouldn't do what his brain was telling them to do. He would press the wrong key. The rhythm would be all wrong, but he didn't give up. He would practice the same 5-note sequence over and over and over again until his fingertips felt sore. He also found another, more secret, way to learn. The Vance's own daughter, a girl a few years older than Leo, started taking piano lessons in the music room. Her teacher would come twice a week. Leo discovered a perfect hiding spot, a small alcove behind a large curtain in the hallway right next to the music room door. When the door was left open a crack, he could hear everything. He couldn't see the keys, but he could listen. He heard the teacher say things like, "Relax your wrists, and count the beat 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. He heard the teacher play scales, do, re mi fa sol la ti do, up and down the piano. Leo would sit there, completely still, absorbing the sounds and the instructions. Then, he would run to the old cottage and try to copy what he had heard, translating the sounds to the yellowed keys of the old piano. Months turned into a year, and then another. The clumsy single-finger notes on Leo's piano slowly became simple, recognizable tunes. The out-of-tune jangle started to form into the melody of Twinkle, Twinkle. Then he learned Happy Birthday. It was a slow, difficult process, filled with frustration. There were days when he felt he would never get it right, when his fingers felt like useless stumps and the music sounded awful. But he remembered the cold look in Mrs. Vance's eyes. He remembered the sound of her mocking laugh, and he would go back the next day and try again. He wasn't doing it for her anymore. He wasn't even doing it to prove her wrong. He was doing it for the pure, simple joy that came in those rare, quiet moments when his fingers finally found the right keys, in the right order, and a real, complete song floated out of the old piano. In those moments, sitting alone in the dusty cottage, he wasn't a servant's son. He was just a boy making music, and it was the most powerful feeling in the world. The years passed and the seasons changed around the Grand Vance mansion. The trees in the garden grew taller and the flowers bloomed and faded again and again. Inside the servants' quarters, the little boy named Leo was slowly disappearing, replaced by a young man. He was now 16, with a quiet seriousness about him. His hands, which once were small and clumsy, had grown stronger, with long, careful fingers. His secret life at the old cottage had continued, a constant rhythm beneath the surface of his daily chores and schoolwork. The old out-of-tune piano was no longer a mystery to him. He had moved far beyond simple children's songs. The books at the library had become more complex, filled with musical notes written on lines and spaces, a language he had taught himself to read. He practiced scales until his fingers could fly across the yellowed keys without him even having to look. He learned pieces by composers whose names he learned to pronounce carefully: Beethoven, Mozart, and one who spoke to him more than any other, Chopin. Mr. Abernathy, the old groundskeeper, had become his silent guardian. He never asked questions, but he would sometimes pause his work outside to listen to the music drifting from his cottage. It was no longer just noise. It was real music, filled with feeling. The old man would shake his head in quiet amazement, a small, proud smile on his weathered face. He knew he was witnessing something special, a secret miracle growing in the shadow of the big house. Leo's mother, Elena, noticed a change in her son, but she could not understand it. She saw him become more quiet, more focused. She sometimes saw him moving his fingers on the kitchen table, as if he were pressing invisible buttons. She worried that he was working too hard or that he was unhappy. She would ask him, "Leo, is everything okay? You seem like you are in another world." He would always give her a warm smile and say, "I'm fine, Mama. I'm just thinking." He could not tell her the truth. He could not tell her that he was still chasing the challenge thrown at him all those years ago. He knew it would only worry her and bring back the painful memory of that day. This was his journey alone. Then an announcement was made in the house. The Vance family was hosting a grand charity gala. It was to be the biggest event of the social season. The mansion buzzed with activity for weeks. Cleaners polished every surface, florists filled the rooms with beautiful arrangements, and extra staff were hired. The air was thick with excitement and pressure. Leo, now old enough, was assigned to work as a server for the event. His mother was busy in the kitchen, helping to coordinate the army of cooks. On the night of the gala, the mansion was transformed. It was filled with the city's most important and wealthy people. The men wore sharp black tuxedos and the women wore glittering gowns and expensive jewelry. Laughter and the clinking of glasses mixed together in a loud, happy hum. Leo moved through the crowd in his crisp server's uniform, carrying a tray of champagne flutes. He was invisible, just part of the background, as servants always are at such parties. He watched the spectacle with a calm detachment. He saw Mr. Vance looking proud and important, shaking hands with guests. He saw Mrs. Vance dressed in a stunning blue gown, her smile bright and practiced as she played the role of the perfect hostess. The main event of the evening was a musical performance. The Vance's daughter, now a young woman, was to play a piece on the grand piano. She had been taking lessons for years from the best teachers money could buy. The guests gathered around the music room and a hush fell over the crowd. She sat at the beautiful piano, the same one Leo had dreamed of as a child, and began to play. It was a complicated piece by a famous composer. Her technique was perfect. Every note was hit with precision. Her fingers moved quickly and accurately across the keys. It was, by all accounts, a flawless performance. The guests listened politely. When she finished, they applauded. It was good, solid applause. The kind of applause people give when they see something done well, something they are expected to appreciate. Her parents beamed with pride. She stood up and gave a little curtsy, her face showing relief that it was over. As the formal part of the evening ended, the crowd began to break up and mingle again. The sound of chatter and laughter filled the air once more. Leo stood near the edge of the room, holding his now empty tray. He looked at the grand piano. It stood silent and majestic, bathed in the soft light of the crystal chandelier. And in that moment, something shifted inside him. For 8 years, this instrument had been a ghost in his life. It was the source of a cruel challenge, a symbol of a world he could not enter, the finish line of a race he had been running completely alone. He had poured all his frustration, all his hope, all his secret dreams into the old broken piano in the cottage. He had learned the language of music on an instrument that could barely speak. Now the real thing was right there, silent, waiting. A thought, wild and terrifying, entered his mind. What if he didn't just dream about it? What if he didn't just practice in secret for a someday that might never come? What if someday was tonight? His heart began to beat very fast, so loud he was sure everyone could hear it. This was crazy. It was reckless. He could lose everything: his mother's job, their home, their stability. Mrs. Vance would be furious. He would be humiliated in front of everyone. But then he heard her voice in his memory, not as a mockery, but as a catalyst. "If you can play this piano." He looked at his mother, who was now watching him from across the room, a question in her eyes. He saw Mr. Abernathy, who had stepped in from the garden to watch the party from a doorway, his old eyes meeting Leo's for a brief second. This wasn't for Mrs. Vance, this wasn't even to prove her wrong. This was for the 8-year-old boy who had been told something was impossible. This was for his mother who worked so hard. This was for all the silent hours in a dusty cottage. This was for the music itself, which had been his only true friend. Without allowing himself another moment to think, without letting fear stop him, he made a decision. He put his tray down quietly on a small nearby table. He took a deep, slow breath, trying to calm the storm inside his chest. Then he started to walk. He walked away from the safety of the walls, away from his place in the shadows. He moved directly through the center of the crowd toward the piano. A few guests noticed the young server moving with a strange purpose. They glanced at him, curious. Then, as he reached the piano, a ripple of confusion went through the people nearby. What was this boy doing? Was he going to clean it, move it? Elena from across the room felt a jolt of pure fear. "Leo. No," she whispered to herself, her hand flying to her mouth. Mrs. Vance, who was laughing with a group of friends, turned her head. Her smile vanished instantly, replaced by a look of cold, disbelieving anger. She took a sharp step forward, but it was too late. Leo, ignoring everything and everyone, sat down on the polished piano stool. The room was still loud with conversation, but a small circle of silence was beginning to form around him. He adjusted the stool slightly, a movement that was instinctual after years of practice. He opened the keyboard cover, revealing the perfect, untouched ivory keys. He placed his hands gently on the keys. They felt cool and smooth, so different from the rough, chipped keys of the old cottage piano. He closed his eyes for a single second, blocking out the grand room, the rich guests, the furious gaze of Mrs. Vance, the terrified eyes of his mother. In that silence, he was back in the cottage. He was just a boy and his music. He took one last deep breath, and then he began to play. The first note Leo played was soft, almost a question. It hung in the air, pure and clear, a single drop of sound in the noisy room. A few people nearby stopped their conversations and turned their heads. They saw a young man in a server's uniform sitting at the grand piano, and their faces showed confusion. Was this some strange, planned part of the entertainment? Then a few more notes followed, slowly, carefully. They formed a quiet, sad melody that seemed to search for something. Leo's body was tense, his shoulders hunched. He was still getting used to the feel of this piano. The keys were so smooth, the action so light and responsive compared to the heavy, stiff keys of the old piano in the cottage. For a few seconds, it was just a simple tune, something you might hear a child play. Mrs. Vance, who had been frozen in anger, now let out a quiet, dismissive breath. She took another step forward, ready to have him removed immediately. This was exactly what she expected, a clumsy, pathetic attempt. She looked around at her guests, ready to share an eye roll, to show them how she had to deal with the foolishness of the help. But she stopped. Because the music did not stay simple. The quiet melody began to grow. Leo's fingers, now warmed up and familiar with the instrument, started to move with more confidence. The searching notes found their direction. The left hand joined in, adding deep, resonant chords that gave the music a powerful foundation. The sad melody began to twist and turn, becoming more complex, more passionate. It was no longer a child's tune. It was a story. The ripple of silence that had started near the piano began to spread through the entire room. One by one, conversations died in the middle of a sentence. People holding glasses forgot to drink. All eyes were drawn to the boy at the piano. The confusion on their faces melted away, replaced by surprise and then by sheer captivation. He was playing a piece by Frédéric Chopin, his Ballade No. 1. It was a mountain of a piece, full of emotional storms and quiet sunsets. It demanded not just technical skill, but a deep understanding of feeling. It required the player to pour their own soul into the music, and that is exactly what Leo did. He forgot about the crowd. He forgot about the Vances. He forgot about everything. The years of secret practice took over. His body relaxed, his hands moving over the keys not with force but with a graceful power. His eyes were focused on some distant point, seeing only the music in his mind. The piece began to build. Soft, gentle passages would suddenly explode into furious, passionate runs. His fingers flew across the keyboard in a blur, each note ringing out with perfect clarity. Then just as suddenly the storm would break, and the music would return to a heartbreakingly beautiful and quiet melody, like a memory of a lost happiness. The guests were utterly mesmerized. This was not the polite, perfect performance they had heard earlier. This was something raw, something real. This was not notes played correctly. This was a heart being played open for everyone to see. You could hear the struggle in the loud, angry parts. You could feel the longing in the soft, sad parts. They were not just listening to a song. They were witnessing a life. Elena, Leo's mother, stood with her hands clasped tightly together, pressed against her chest. Tears were streaming down her face, but she wasn't sad. She was witnessing a miracle. She looked at her son, and she did not see a servant. She saw an artist. She saw the focused determination in his face, the absolute mastery in his hands. In that moment, she understood everything. She understood his quietness, his secret walks, his fingers moving on the table. He had been carrying this incredible secret for years, all by himself. Her heart swelled with a pain and a pride so strong she could hardly breathe. Mr. Abernathy, still standing in the doorway, had taken his old cap off and was holding it over his heart. His eyes were damp. He had heard the progress over the years, from clumsy notes to this. But hearing it on the old jangly piano was one thing. Hearing it on this magnificent instrument, played with such power and emotion, was something else entirely. He felt a deep, fierce joy for the boy. Mr. Vance, the Tycoon, was a man who valued achievement above all else. He respected skill, dedication, and results. He had been annoyed at first by the interruption, but that annoyance had quickly vanished. He was not a deeply emotional man, but he was a smart one. He recognized greatness when he saw it. He watched Leo's hands. He listened to the complex emotions pouring from the piano, and he was deeply, profoundly impressed. This was not a servant's son embarrassing himself. This was a prodigy revealing himself in the most dramatic way possible. He glanced at his wife, and his expression was not one of anger but of sharp, calculating curiosity. But the most dramatic transformation was on the face of Mrs. Vance. Her initial anger had turned to shock, and then the shock had drained the color from her face. She stood perfectly still, her expensive gown suddenly feeling like a costume. She heard the music, and it was like each note was mocking her. She remembered her words spoken so long ago in this very room. If you can play this piano, he wasn't just playing it. He was mastering it. He was commanding it. He was doing something with it that her own daughter, with all the expensive lessons, could never do. He was filling the room with a beauty that her money could not buy. The shame was a physical heat rising up her neck and into her cheeks. Her own cruel challenge, meant to put a little boy in his place, had backfired in the most public and spectacular way imaginable. The music built towards its famous, thunderous finale. Leo's body was pouring all its energy into the keys. The music became a wild, rushing whirlwind of sound, powerful and desperate and beautiful all at once. It climbed higher and higher, the tension becoming almost unbearable, and then with a series of crashing, powerful chords, it ended. The final note echoed through the completely silent room and then faded away. For a long moment there was nothing, no sound at all. The crowd was frozen, still lost in the world the music had created. Then one person began to clap. It was a slow, deliberate clap. Then another person joined in, and then another. In a matter of seconds the spell broke and the room erupted. This was not the polite applause from before. This was a roaring, passionate standing ovation. People were cheering. They were clapping not because it was expected, but because they had been moved in a way they could not explain. The sound of the applause finally brought Leo back to the present. He slowly took his hands from the keys and placed them in his lap. He looked out at the sea of faces, all looking at him with awe and admiration. He saw his mother crying and clapping harder than anyone. He saw Mr. Abernathy nodding at him with a proud smile. He saw Mr. Vance clapping with a look of respect, and then his eyes met those of Mrs. Vance. She was not clapping. She was just standing there, pale and still, a statue of her own shame. In her eyes he saw the defeat of her cruel words. He had not just played the piano. He had shattered the world she had built around him. The servant's son had just become the star of the show. The roaring applause seemed to go on forever. For Leo, sitting at the piano, it felt like a dream. The bright lights, the sea of smiling, clapping faces, it was all a blur. His heart was still pounding, but now it was from the shock of what he had done, not from the fear of doing it. He slowly stood up from the stool. His legs felt a little weak. He gave a small, awkward bow, not knowing what else to do. The crowd loved it. They cheered even louder. He was no longer just the server. He was the mysterious piano prodigy. Through the noise and the crowd, he saw his mother pushing her way toward him. Her face was streaked with tears, but she was smiling a smile he had never seen before. It was a smile of pure, shining pride. She reached him, and without a care for who was watching, she threw her arms around him, holding him tight. "My son," she whispered into his ear, her voice choked with emotion. "My brilliant, talented son. All this time, I had no idea." He held her back, feeling a wave of relief wash over him. The secret was out, and her reaction was everything he hadn't known he needed. The party, of course, could not just continue as if nothing had happened. The spell had been broken, and the main topic of conversation was now the astonishing young man in the server's uniform. Guests were whispering to each other, asking who he was, where he had learned to play like that. Mr. Vance watched all of this with a sharp, businesslike eye. The initial surprise had worn off, and his practical mind had taken over. He saw the energy in the room. He saw the way people were looking at the boy, and by extension at his house. This was not an embarrassment. It was an opportunity. It was a story that would be told for years, and it had happened under his roof. He saw his wife standing off to the side, looking pale and uncomfortable. He knew the history, he remembered her foolish challenge. He felt a flicker of irritation toward her. Her pride had almost cost them a moment of great prestige. But he was a man who fixed problems and seized advantages. He walked over to Leo and Elena. The crowd parted for him. He stood before them, a powerful man in his own home, looking at the maid and her son. But his gaze was not one of superiority now. It was one of assessment, of respect for a skill he could not himself possess. "Young man," Mr. Vance said, his voice calm and carrying. "That was exceptional." Leo looked at him, unsure of what to say. "Thank you, sir," he managed, his voice quiet. Mr. Vance then turned his attention to Elena. "Elena, you have raised a remarkable son. To have such discipline, such talent. It speaks volumes of his character. And of yours." Elena, still holding on to Leo's arm, simply nodded, her eyes wide. She was waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the anger, for the dismissal, but it didn't come. "What you did took courage," Mr. Vance continued, looking back at Leo. "But raw courage and talent are not enough. They need direction. They need an education." He paused, letting his words sink in for everyone listening. "Therefore, I would like to make you an offer. I will provide you with a full scholarship. You will attend the finest music conservatory in the country. All of it, the tuition, the books, the room and board, will be taken care of. Consider it an investment in a future I believe in." The room gasped softly. It was a grand, generous offer. It was life-changing. Leo felt the air leave his lungs. A music conservatory? A real school for music? It was everything he had ever dreamed of but never dared to hope for. He looked at his mother. Her hand was over her mouth again, but this time in shock and hope. Mr. Vance's offer was smart. It was not the offer from the old challenge. He was not offering to raise Leo. That would have been an insult, a pretend family after all these years. This was different. This was a business transaction wrapped in generosity. It was him acknowledging Leo's talent as a valuable thing and putting his money behind it. It allowed him to look like a great patron of the arts, and it neatly solved the awkward situation his wife had created. Leo knew this. He was not a child anymore. He understood the world of deals and appearances, but he also understood that this was a real chance, a golden key being handed to him. He would be a fool not to take it. "Sir," Leo said, finding his voice, "that is a very kind offer. I would be honored to accept." He then added, "Thank you." Mr. Vance gave a single, satisfied nod. The matter was settled. The party slowly began to return to its normal hum, though the energy was forever changed later that night. After the last guest had left and the mansion was quiet again, Leo and his mother were in their small room. The silence felt different now. It was not the silence of secrets and tiredness, but a peaceful, hopeful silence. Elena held both of his hands in hers. "All those years," she said softly. "You were in that old cottage with Mr. Abernathy, weren't you?" "Learning on that broken piano," Leo nodded. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you, Mama. I didn't want you to worry, or to remember the bad things she said." "Oh, my boy," she said, her eyes filling with tears again. "You took her ugly words and you made something beautiful from them. You should never be sorry for that." She looked around their small, simple room. "You will go to that school. You will have the life you were meant to have. I am so proud of you." In the days that followed, things began to change. The story of the servant's son who played like a master spread through the town. Leo became a local legend. Mr. Vance, true to his word, had his lawyers draw up the papers for the scholarship. It was official. Elena, with her son's encouragement and the small savings she had, decided to leave her job at the mansion. It was time. With Leo's future secured, she used her talent for sewing and her years of managing a household to open a small tailor shop in the town. It was her own dream, finally realized. On the day Leo left for the conservatory in the city, he went to say goodbye to Mr. Abernathy. The old groundskeeper was waiting for him by the cottage. "I suppose you won't be needing this old thing anymore," Mr. Abernathy said, nodding toward the dusty piano inside. Leo smiled. "That old thing taught me everything," he said. "It was my first friend. I will never forget it. Or you, thank you, for everything." The old man's eyes grew damp. He just patted Leo on the shoulder. A world of pride in that simple gesture. Leo left the Vance estate that day not through the servants' entrance, but through the front gates. His suitcase in his hand, his future ahead of him. He did not look back at the grand mansion. He looked forward toward the city, toward the music. He knew his story was not about a tycoon's wife who was proven wrong. It was not about a rich man's charity. His story was about a quiet, stubborn love for something beautiful. It was about the power of a dream, nurtured in secret, and the strength it takes to finally step into the light and share your gift with the world. The music had set him free.